the Ottawa Senators. Over the last week, I have to imagine if you are a fan, tough time. Just let me, if you don't mind, I want to go through a timeline here, just of some things that have happened over the last few days. Your last place in the Atlantic Division, Thomas Chabot is out 4 to 6 weeks with a fractured hand. Shane Pinto suspended 41 games for a gambling infraction. Evidence found that Ottawa was at fault for the Evgenii Dadonov aborted trade from Vegas to Anaheim for basically not disclosing specifics of a no trade clause. And then Pierre Dorion fired as general manager yesterday. Interim GM now Steve Staios, which sort of means that Steve Dangle was right in predicting that he'd be GM of the Ottawa Senators. And Michael Andlauer, he let it fly yesterday at that press conference. CJ, what have you made of the Ottawa Senators last few days, and specifically yesterday's events?
Well, look, it's been a tough stretch. There's no way around that. I mean, that's a season's worth of, tough news packed into a week and a half or whatever it's been. It does, now that we've learned a little bit more about what happened in the Dadonov situation, I think it was an untenable situation in terms of keeping Pierre Dorion. Might have been the one word that stood out for me that Michael Andlauer used in the press conference was negligence. Mm-hmm. Which seemed to me to suggest the Senators felt that they maybe even could have tried to terminate Pierre Dorion with cause, meaning they wouldn't necessarily have to pay him. Obviously, that didn't happen. I think they negotiated his exit. That's why it was branded a resignation officially. I'll remind you as well that Mike Babcock departed Columbus with a resignation, not a firing. And so, yeah, I mean, pretty eventful period here. And, it'd be interesting to see how they respond. I don't know I don't know to what degree this gets into a dressing room. Let's face it, the best players on that team are all pretty young. I'm not sure how concerned they are with what's going on in the front office, but you can't deny that the entire environment around that team and some of it for the positive, but in the last 2 months has changed, right? You've got new ownership. All of a sudden you've got, Steve Staios being installed as the president, now the interim GM. You have Daniel Alfredson back around the team and on the ice. There's been a fair number of changes there, and Pierre Dorion had been the general manager for the last 8 years in Ottawa, was an assistant GM before that, so was a real mainstay in that organization. And, in the last year, you've had him depart. His 2 assistant GMs have departed in the last year and a half. And so there's been a lot of turnover and stuff going on behind the scenes. And, losing a first round draft pick, I mean, we haven't even got to that, is, that's difficult. That's tough. I mean, a team like Ottawa, we're expecting them. They're losing that draft pick in 24, 25, or 26. And in that period of time, Ottawa's expecting to be a playoff team, right? And so the first rounder might not be that high in those years necessarily, although we'll see where it's going this year with the way things have gone. But, you'd want that pick, say, to make a big trade at a certain point in time, or, there's just value to that asset that is tough to replace. And I think that was part of the frustration you heard from Michael Andlauer in his press conference, is he's just saying he doesn't understand why this wasn't decided ahead of time, and why he's essentially inheriting this punishment.
What was it like just seeing all of these events just kind of happen one by one? You mentioned it, like the fact that it's kind of happened over a week. It's one thing to kind of add context to why these things are happening, as you just did now, but as your job as an insider and just staying on top of stuff, like, I know for me, just seeing it from a distance, I'm just like, what the hell is going on? Like, you kind of figure that these are things that would happen in the old Eugene Melnyk era, not in this new era. Like, I'm beside myself at how all this just kind of came to a head over the last few days.
Well, I mean, look, at the Pinto situation is specific to an investigation that happened, and that took some time, but, I'm led to believe that there was a lot of nuance to that situation. It wasn't a clear cut, this is what he did wrong. I think that there had to be a fair bit of due diligence done before a punishment was handed out there. And then obviously his punishment was negotiated as well with the NHLPA. And so, I think that timing is less puzzling to me. If I could get one, if we're playing like a game show here, and I get like one question that I can ask that has to be answered truthfully, I'd honestly love to get to the bottom or know why it took so long for there to be punishment in the Dadonov situation. Because, we're talking about the original trade, the one where, basically what I've been able to uncover through my sources, Julian, is on the trade call when Ottawa traded Dadonov to Vegas. There was a specific question asked: does Dadonov have any no trade protection or clauses in his contract? And Pierre specifically said, at least according to my sources, no. He didn't submit the list. And so, I mean, you can understand if that's what's contained in that 73-page report the NHL put together, why he's no longer the GM. I mean, it's basically either he forgot about it or he outright lied or whatever, but it's you can't really come back from that. And so given that trade was made in the summer of 2021 and we're sitting here almost at the start of 2024, it's not clear to me why that took so long for a ruling. And I asked some people involved and couldn't really get a straight answer. A lot of people, there's multiple teams involved in this. A lot of people from the other teams are saying, like, I don't get it either. But I think that's where a lot of Michael Andlauer's frustration was. I mean, I know he made a comment about Shane Pinto during that press conference, but really what I was hearing is I think he just would have liked to have known where this was headed when he was buying the team. I don't for a second think he was going to not buy the team, though, by the way. Like, I've seen that out there. It's like, dude, if you're buying a big fancy house and you don't like the way one room's painted or whatever, if you want to change the countertop in the kitchen, while those are significant enough renovations, it doesn't usually keep you from buying the house. And so I think he would have bought the Sens. He just would have liked a better idea of exactly what he was buying. That's the way I interpreted his words anyway in that press conference.
So you don't think he's going to push back on going to the league and be like, hey, I didn't know this sink was faulty in my house when I bought it? You don't think he's going to go back to the NHL and try to make a bigger stink of it?
Oh, for sure. I think he is. I mean, look, the path is here. I don't know if you remember the situation where Ilya Kovalchuk initially had what was ruled to be an illegal contract with the Devils, and the Devils were given basically a first round pick as penalty for essentially trying to circumvent the salary cap with the way they structured that contract. And it was a similar thing. I don't remember the years off the top of my head, but there was a choice of years and the Devils just kept punting till it got to the last year. And then the NHL said, you know what, we're going to rescind that punishment. To me, that's the pattern you follow here. If you're Ottawa, you're basically in your mind saying that's going to be our 2026 first rounder. And we're going to be on best behavior these next couple of years. Keep maybe bringing it up when there's a board of governors meeting and Michael Andlauer's there, gets a chance to maybe see Gary Bettman at a cocktail reception or for a coffee in the lobby of the hotel, and maybe just remind him, hey, we really like that punishment taken away. That's not saying 100% it will happen, but I think the path is there. Like, if history gives us a path to get on best behavior, Michael, get a new GM in, don't cause any problems, don't hold many press conferences like that. Like, I think he gets one. I think, like, as much as we all loved it, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, I found that to be a gripping press conference.
Yes.
And I would love to hear NHL owners speak that candidly and emotionally on big issues all the time. There's a reason why it doesn't happen. And so, yeah, he's not getting fined for that one, but I have to believe he probably can't have too many press conferences like that, or it's going to become a problem. But basically, put your head down, do your work, and hope by 2026 the league's taken away that pick. And maybe they never do end up paying the punishment. We'll just have to see how that goes.
No wonder we didn't bring up the first round pick. The Ottawa Senators want us to forget about it.
Well, I mean, I guess the tough thing is when would that decision come? Like, that decision might not come until, I mean, they might still not be able to trade it, if you know what I'm saying. Even if they end up getting to keep it, they might just say right before the draft or whatever, after the draft lottery, do you know what, you can keep this. I mean, either way, it's not a good situation. But lots of teams waste their first round pick with the selection they make. So, I mean, it's also not, it's not the end of the world. I've seen a lot of commentary on this. I mean, the first round pick, basically when you do something to circumvent the rules, to potentially give yourself an advantage over other teams, I think in this case, like, what's maybe lost a little bit is two teams on the back end of this got screwed over, right? I mean, first of all, Vegas, they took a PR hit on that trade, right? The way that, if you go back and look at the coverage at the time, I've been saying that. I was able to dig up some tweets. Like, it was a lot of like, this is Vegas mistreating players again, this and this and that. And even Anaheim was going to make a deal that I think that they liked. They were getting a draft pick with Dadonov. They were unloading Ryan Kessler's contract, and he was, injured for his career at that point in time. They were going to trade John Moore, who they had just acquired in the Hampus Lindholm deal from Boston. So obviously they took on that money from Boston, probably with the idea that they could trade it on somewhere else. And so, two teams got screwed over on the other end of that because of, what was essentially a misrepresentation of the facts on the trade call, the original one with Ottawa and Vegas. And so I think that there should be a strong punishment. I get that people say, well, this isn't as bad as what Chicago did. That's not, to me, that's not the argument in this case. If you want to use it to go back and say, hey, do you know what? That Chicago did not get penalized to near enough degree, that's totally fair. But I don't think you can use Chicago in reverse and say, well, they shouldn't be giving up a first round pick. I do think that was a significant violation committed by the Senators organization. And it had nothing to do with Michael Landauer at the time, but he bought the Senators organization. So much, if we're going to use the buying a house theme again, when you buy a house and then you find out 6 months in that there's a cracked pipe, you got to deal with it. Even if you maybe wished you had known before you bought the house. I mean, that's just kind of, once you buy it, you assume kind of some liability. And that's really where I think he's at. And I understand his frustration. I'm not being critical of him. In fact, I think if you're a Senators fan, you probably like hearing your owner come out and sort of be that fiery and defend your team. And I think that everyone wins in a sense with the way he went there. And he was right on the line, though. I got to think of, I would love to have had a live cam on like Gary Bettman or Bill Daly as that thing was going on, because the way that we were all enjoying it, I can't imagine, the league doesn't tend to do business this way, right? There's a reason we're all freaking out about that press conference. It's because that's not like what we usually see in these situations.